Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren, and today we continue with the third turn of the Shadowtech goddess Stenibelle. When last we read, we were introduced to Stenibelle, who is a female version of Lord Stenstrom of Belmont, South Tyrol, in this third universe, the third turn of the dial on top of the antimeter. He is a girl. And I was doing all kinds of fooling around with trying to obscure the fact that he is a she in this particular story, and it was kind of annoying. I was kind of dreading reading that, but it's over with. That shit is done. Now we get into the meat of the story. Stenibelle starts off the tale in jail. She was a guest of Hagthorpe Prison for 10 standard years for the theft and malfeasance of command of the main fleet vessel Seeker. Pretty much the exact same situation Paymaster Stenstrom found himself in Sands of the Solar Empire with the Seeker and the Admirals and yada yada yada. Only in this case, Stenibelle failed. She got caught by the fleet, was tried, convicted, and thrown in jail. But a mysterious visitor arrived just a few months into her sentence and asked her if she'd like a opportunity to clear her name and get out of jail. And confused, she said, well, sure. And that was the end of that. And then a few weeks later, she was out of prison, a newly freed woman. She was giving back her accoutrement, which was all basically teeny tiny size men's clothes, including the HRN coat, which is the trademark of Paymaster Stenstrom, no matter what universe he or she happens to be in. And she met Lord Aram and Lady Alesta, who had arrived via Ripcar to take her into space. She already knew Lord Aram from her days on the Seeker, as few as they were. He was her helmsman, just as he was for Paymaster Stenstrom back in the other book. Didn't really enjoy seeing him again. It brought up a lot of bad memories. She's grappling with these thoughts of humiliation, of being censured, thrown on the bag, ripped a new one in the posts, and then thrown in prison. And seeing Aram kind of brought that all back. With him was Lady Alesta, his betrothed, and she didn't know her at all. And they start telling her weird things, that they are from another universe, and in another universe, she is a he. They laid a lot of stuff on her. She didn't necessarily believe them, but this is the League. Weird things happen. People are used to weirdness a lot more than we are here in this reality that we all inhabit. So if someone were to come up to you and say, hey, I'm from another universe, and you knew me there, and you were a guy there, you'd be like, yeah, continue smoking whatever it is you started elsewhere. No, in the League, people will hear weird things and not necessarily write the person telling them these things off as pure lunacy, because lunatic things happen in the Leagues. But she didn't necessarily believe them, but regardless, they tell her that she has been freed by a mysterious professor from the University of D, and she is on her way to meeting this professor. They also inform her that this professor has a habit of collecting downtrodden people who have little recourse available to them, people who nevertheless have certain skills that could be useful. And Stenibelle, being a Tyrolese sorceress, is just brimming with skills that the enterprising and possibly criminal professor could take advantage of, and that appears to be happening. We didn't meet the professor, we just heard about the professor. In this chapter today, we will be meeting that professor. Chapter 2, Hannah Ben Sherlamp. And surprise, in previous books where we've met Professor Shurlamp, we met her in the Cat book, we met her again in the Shadowtech Goddess book. I always found that my voice just wouldn't do her justice in these readings. Tenacious, imperious lady, and my voice just wouldn't do. So in past readings, I've had my good friend from across the pond, the incomparable Cass Peace, read her lines, and Cass did an amazing job. In this case, I didn't ask Kat to read her lines because there's a lot of them, and I know Cass is very busy, didn't want to intrude on her time. So, instead of Cass reading the lines of Grand Dame Hannah Ben Sherland, is the amazing Carol Phillips, who's the artist of my books. The beautiful cover you're looking at right now, that came from Carol's skilled hand. A lady of many talents. Carol is a gifted painter, a gifted sculptor, a singer as well. She's dipped herself into the singing waters. She's come a long way from when I met her 10 or 11 years ago, and she was really, really shy, but she's spread her wings, which is good to see. So today we're pleased to welcome Carol as she reads the lines of Hannah Ben Sherland. And she quite a different take on Hannah Ben than Cass took, but that's fine. This is a different Hannah Ben in a different universe. I welcome those type of interpretations. So let's proceed immediately. This is a longish chapter, not too long, but it's not a short one. So let's begin and see where this tale takes us. Stenibelle, Chapter 2, Hannah Ben Sherland. Long faces and an awkward silence were the order of the day as the ride into space continued. The sky car ascended into the lower atmosphere and linked up with a slow transport in orbit. There, Stenibelle thankfully took her leave from Aram and Lady Alesta. They were both clearly disappointed and at a loss for words as she walked away. She didn't even say goodbye. And what of it? She'd become used to disappointing people. People she loved. Friends both old and new. It was a habit she'd gotten into. And who were these two? They were not her friends. Who were they that she needed their consent or approval? But what about Aram, the kid from the Admiral's office who followed her into space on the Seeker? I can fly. Been flying all my life. He had trusted her, and then, "They're boarding us, Belle. What do we do?" Stenibelle muttered to herself as the ugly memories played themselves out in her head once again. "I don't know. What can we do? I'm sorry I got you into this. What do we do?" She remembered Aram sitting there in his Calvert suit as she walked away. "I'm sorry I disappointed you, Aram. You deserved better." Her benefactor's generosity continued. First release from prison, now first-class accommodations. She'd been given a lovely room in the first-class section of the transport. It was nice and self-contained and, most importantly, all expenses paid. That was important, as Stenibelle was all but a newly hatched pauper. She stayed in her room, not partaking of the general meals and occasional camaraderie of the common area. The one time she did come out to fetch a second helping of dessert, a gentleman in a Remnath suit saw her and wished to strike up a conversation. He offered her a cigarette. "Look at you, Belle. You're so cute. The gentlemen simply adore you," Virginia liked to say. "You could court any you wished." She was in no state to be social. She wanted nothing to do with this man, or anybody else. She refused his cigarette. She sat in her room and watched the stars go by, freed from prison, but still very much a prisoner of her shame. Her thoughts spun. Lieutenant Gwendolyn of Prentice, the tall Xenon woman from the fleet who came to take her ship. She bristled at the thought of her. "Lady Belmont, I hereby relieve you of your chair and remand you immediately into fleet custody for theft and malfeasance of command. And, on a personal note, you could have at least made this difficult for me." The transport made its lazy way from Brynval to Cana over the course of 2 days, Stenibelle's mood matching the pace of the journey. As it settled into a high orbit, there was a knock on her door. She meekly answered, "Yes." Standing at her door was Ottoman John, this time looking much more at ease than he had on Hagthorpe. Apparently, the stuffy surroundings and manufactured air of the transport was much more to his liking. "Lady Belmont, it's good to see you again. I have summoned a footman to attend to your things. If you would, may I entreat you to follow me?" "Sir Ottoman, not quite so green this time out. Pity. I thought the shades suited you." Had Stenibelle said that or just thought it? She wasn't sure. Ottoman John didn't react one way or the other, so she must not have said anything. "Come this way, please." Stenibelle was used to the regimented life in prison, and Ottoman's request had the sound of an order. She came out of her room, popped on her hat, and followed Ottoman John without a word or thought of protest. As she followed him through the ship, her previous conversation with Lady Alesta and Aram flashed through her mind. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To see your benefactor." "And who is that?" If Aram and Alesta were not utterly mad and had told her the truth, then she already knew the answer. A strange professor from Calvert awaited her at the end of this journey. "Please, we've a schedule to maintain. All shall be made plain in short order." "Fine. No vomiting." Once again, she thought witty things, but didn't bother to say them. They stepped into a waiting rip car and quickly were out of the transport and on their way down to Cana below. Stenibelle sat in her seat quietly, still hearing the raised voices of her detractors that had assailed her during the trial. A disgrace and a traitor. The worst and most ill-thought-out appointee in recent memory. We shall rewrite the book based on this disaster. If you weren't a lady, I'd call for your head. She, sitting there on the stand, listening to the searing words, seeing her father sitting in the gallery. The memory of it all pained her as if it had just happened. "I'm sorry, Father. I did my best." As the rip car dropped into the atmosphere, Stenibelle could see the long golden line of the eastern coast tracking from south to north. About midway up was the spur of land jutting into the water where Tyrol was located. Tyrol, Belmont Manor, her home. She wanted to go home, to bask in it and be soothed by all the things she loved. But the rip car veered south of the great Armenelos forests. The rip car soon was skimming the treetops of the forest, dark green and primordial, bursting with life. A craggy gray stone manor, plunked somewhere in the tangled growth jutting above the trees, appeared at a rapid pace. The rip car settled into a tenuous clearing, landscaped and studded with fountains and pathways. Containment came down and Stenibelle got out. Several servants ushered her onto a central path, passing not one but two string quartets, winged and hosed and dressed for success, spilling sweet cultured music into the afternoon air amid the cawing and flapping commotion of the forest perimeter beyond. Gardeners hauled wheelbarrows full of shorn vegetation away. Keeping the massive forest at bay was clearly a daily chore. Winged reptilian beasts lurked at the fringes of the compound, occasionally shaking the branches. Stenibelle, despite the sweet music and manicured lawns, thought she could hear the wild forest stretching and growing all around her. Wigged footmen in frills, buckle shoes, and pastel coats came forward to receive her. She was whisked down a footpath to the cool, temperature-controlled interior of the manor. Clattering on marble and polished stone, she was led through enameled corridors under paneled ceilings and painted hangings. Somewhere down a quiet wing, a heavy door opened for her. A spacious chamber, ornate and splendid, waited within. "If you will, my lady, fine garments have been laid out for you," the footman said. "Please, we entreat you to put them on. Do you require assistance?" Stenibelle could see a lovely gown draped over a mannequin, waiting within, accompanied by flanking mannequins holding trays bearing fine linens and knickers, and a pair of jeweled shoes. "Of course I don't need any assistance. Excellent. Women of Tyro are so independent, so I've been told. If you would then, the footman motioned her to enter. She stepped inside and the heavy door shut behind her. Standing in the Baroque room, livid with finery, she heard the mags slide and engage. Locked in. She'd come all this way to be imprisoned again. She could pick the lock and be out if she wanted. She could fade into the shadows and not be seen as her mother had taught her. Before the trial, she would have done those things. She would have not have stood there in a strange manner, locked in an unfamiliar room. Fabulous, certainly, but no less a prison than her bare cell in Hagthorpe. Before the seeker, Lady Stenibelle would not be bound. Instead, she was now the post-seeker, post-trial Stenibelle, the beaten one, the disgraced, incompetent one her mother, thankfully, hadn't lived to see. I hereby order you to come about, stand clear, and await my boarding. The one who did as she was told. Obediently, she took her HRN and boots off, carefully laying them out on a table where automated mannequins came and spirited them away, brushing the material as they went. The mannequins were geared and tautly cabled, some being full human automatons, clicking with precision movement and pre-programmed grace. Others were wheeled and only partially human-like, and others were just delicate appendages running on mounted rails. Off came her man's pants and her frilly white blouse. More mannequins took those. She let her Vith triangle hat fall to the floor. It didn't remain there long. Another mannequin bore it away. There she was, standing there in a gilded mirror, nude, a smallish black-haired woman, pretty, with an inviting smile, though she wasn't smiling at the moment. Blue eyes like ice. Now those were rather striking. The gentleman calling on her through the years always remarked on her eyes. Good hips, Tyrol hips like her mother had, built for punching out 20 or 30 children. There were the 2 dotted moons of her breasts and the waiting pearl of her vagina. She was in need of personal grooming to keep things properly in check. She tried to imagine herself as a man, taller with muscles, no hips and a codpiece. Couldn't see it. Wasn't possible. She mused. If I had had a little something dangling there, I wouldn't be in this mess, would I? I could have married some tea drinker. I could have bedded and given her a good pounding every evening and punched out Belmont heirs left and right. What currency a little hog leg can offer. Water came on in the bath chamber beyond, and the mannequins gestured for her to enter and wash. She felt the steam and heat of the hissing water and smelt the fine oils and expensive soaps awaiting her. Her showers at Hagthorpe had all been cold and sterile. She saw something lying on the dense carpeting of the floor. It was a small photo. Possibly it had fallen out of the pocket of her HRN as the mannequin had carried it away. Where had it come from? She hadn't seen it before. Perhaps those 2 crazy people, Aram and Alesta, had put it there, trying to stir some sort of nostalgia within her. That must be the case. She picked it up and looked at it. There, in the photo, was a group of people standing together, smiling. She recognized Lady Alesta and Aram. They looked to be a very happy and well-suited couple. She envied them a little bit as she gazed at the photo. They had each other, and that's all that seemed to matter. Next to them was a tall, handsome man, and near him was a pretty, but somewhat proper-looking woman wearing a fleet uniform with long brown hair. She stood with perfect posture and regal bearing. That tall man, he was wearing an HRN coat just like hers, only bigger and longer. It was unmistakable. He had a Belmont face, like her father, and black Belmont hair. Imps jutted from his sash, eyes blue like ice. Wait, she sucked in her breath. Was that her? Alesta and Aram had said she was a man in another reality. A bunch of balderdash, who wouldn't think so? However, the whole concept of alternate realities wasn't totally new or alien to her. Her mother, during her years of secret training in Tyrol sorcery in the abandoned culvert under the city had speculated on the existence of such a thing, and come to think of it, she had the occasional distant dreams of being a man, of fighting like a man and firing the imps, of loving women. So, no, being a man in an alternate reality didn't, after some reflection, surprise her much at all. She stood there holding a photo that belonged in another universe, was taken in another universe, depicting people from another universe. Everything seemed pretty normal and familiar, except for him/her. It figured that he/she would be the odd man/woman out. Perhaps the photo was a fake, and Aram and Alesta were out to con her. Con her of what? Money? The man in the picture wore a triangle Vith hat like she did, tie-roll boots of leather and silver, and wore a green sash, with the wooden handles of 2 pistols that resembled ints jutting out. She recognized the detailing on the grips. Those were her grandfather's ints, the ones she herself carried, though they wouldn't function for her because she was a woman. If Aram and Alesta were con artists, then they were master forgers. Stenstrom the Younger, Lord of Belmont, South Tyrol. If this photo was to be believed, then in another place she was a man, and therefore her house wasn't doomed. In another place she hadn't lost her chair and been sent to prison. Aram and Alesta hadn't mentioned that. On the contrary, they seemed surprised and put off by her dour attitude and situation. They said he was the bonded captain of the Seeker. He had succeeded. That was reason for a bit of hope. In another universe, perhaps she wasn't another defeated failure. She had a bit of longing for a moment as the water from the shower hissed. Some of her old spirit began to stir, just like when she was a girl fruitlessly wrestling with her sister Lyra, always the smaller and the weaker, but not lacking in spirit or determination. "Get up," Lyra would say as Stenibelle lay in the sandpit. And without fail, she always got up to come to grips with her and try again. Her eyes fell across the picture to the woman standing next to him. Who is she? Long brown hair, wearing a female-issue fleet uniform. A lieutenant. She had a rather stern expression for a lady. A rapier dangled from her hip. She'd seen that face before. Where? Wait, it's her! Lieutenant Gwendolyn from the Demophalon John, who boarded her powerless ship and started the chain of events that led to her being seated, paneled, tried, disgraced, and imprisoned. Demophalon John coming into dock. What are we gonna do, Belle? What are we gonna do? Lieutenant Gwendolyn, Lady Apprentice. A woman she hated, truth be told. Look at them standing there, prim and proper. Yet there was a familiar closeness to them, as with Aram and Alesta. What were they, courting? Romancing? With her? Perhaps her alternate male counterpart had little proper taste in women. Hated memories barged into her head. Hated voices. Lady Belmont's ignorance and spacefaring was matched only by her soulless, uninspirational incompetence as a commander, was Gwendolyn's rather terse testimony on the stand. She angrily put the photo down and walked into the bathroom. She stepped into the shower and washed, talking to herself as she did so. Incompetence. I had a half-scuttled ship and a crew of 2. What was I to do? Memories intermixed with the rising steam of the water. Can we run? Can we fight? We got nothing, Belle, she pleaded to no one. What could I have done? Lady Belmont, I am here to remove you from command and take you into custody. Don't let her get away with that, Belle. Knock her out. Knock her teeth out. She finished her wash, dried, and began the long process of dressing. She stepped into her knickers and linens, pulled on her hose, and laced up the corset. She took the gown off the mannequin and laboriously donned it, taking the better part of an hour to get it properly situated around her small body. Then she made her face up and put on the heeled shoes. Despite the drudgery, she liked putting on her uniform. as it brought back happy memories of home when she and her army of sisters got ready for dinner in the vast manor changing room, all of them stepping into garments, pulling corsets tight, pinning their hair up, and applying makeup. Many of her sisters were old enough to be her mother, and she saw little of them except in the changing room where all of them, together, labored to get ready for dinner. Those same sisters who disavowed her even as she fought to protect their household and heritage. Stenibelle was impressed as she brushed on her face. Everything was correct and of the finest quality. The linens, corset, and gown were all of the proper size. The face paints were all of a shade she favored. The creams enhanced her skin tone. She liked the perfume, and even the shoes fit perfectly. Whoever this Hannah Ben Sherland was, she was meticulous in her details. Her hair was wild and uncontrollable at the moment, a black curly mass on her head needing a barber's attention. She tamed it as best she could. "Look at your hair, Belle," Virginia used to say. "You resemble a Monima with all that hair. Let me do something with this." She smiled. Virginia always could make her laugh. There came a knock at her door. "You may enter," she said, holding her brush. The door to the chamber opened as she sat at the boudoir. It was a footman wearing teal and lace. "Good lady, you are expected at audience," he said. "If you would, please." Stenibelle put down her brush, glided out of the room, and followed the footman deep into the interior of the manor. Up a vast staircase, she was led into a colossal study, which was baroque enough to have come straight from a dream. Colonnades rising up, domes hammered in black and gold, inner terraces, and stone walls carved in bold relief. Sitting behind a gilded hardwood Hoban desk in the center of the room was a woman dressed in a snowy gown of white, gently typing away at a keyboard with one hand and manipulating a large glyph with the other as a tumbling gallery of holographic icons floated about her head. The glyph looked like a jeweled magic wand, and with a flick of it, she controlled vast amounts of data. She seemed to be working on at least 10 different things at once, each with equal vigor and aplomb. A hollow photo of a portly wigged man floated in a prominent place among the other hollows. She snickered to herself. "Tell your father to watch the bonbons," she thought. Stenibelle always had a moderately ribald wit, and occasionally embarrassed Lyra and Virginia with offhanded and ill-timed quips when they went to town. A pink padded chair with Dragon Ball feet sat in front of the desk. Stenibelle went toward it and awaited an invitation to sit. The woman at the desk continued typing and glyphing, sitting quite still and erect, save for her fingers, which moved at a flurry. She spoke into several cones, her voice muffled. After several minutes, she, without looking up, said,
"Be seated. I'll be with you in a moment."
Stenibelle sat and gazed at the woman. Though seated, she was clearly tall and fairly buxom. Her skin was powdered to a pearly white, and she wore a towering wig of curled locks that looked like a carefully swirled mound of white frosting, almost good enough to eat. A few tendrils of raven black hair fell out of the seams of the wig, and her eyebrows beneath the powder were clearly black. Her eyes, like two brown buttons on a snowy landscape, stood out sharply. As she waited, Stenibelle felt her humor come up. She decided to speak and break the ice. "Your father is a handsome man," she noted the hollow picture of the wigged man floating over the desk. She thought to be bold and ironic, as the man certainly wasn't handsome. The woman stopped what she was doing.
"That, my dear lady, is my beloved husband,"
she said in a regal contralto voice. She began typing again. "Oh, your pardon." Inside, Stenibelle was roiling in laughter. What? Were they having a sale at the leper farm when you happened by? She wanted to say it. She wanted to show this woman she was still a confident and bold person. Without ceasing the pace of her typing or bothering to look in Stenibelle's direction, she spoke.
"Doubtless you are aware who I am, and clearly I know who you are. Therefore, standard opening pleasantries are irrelevant. Now then."
Stenibelle jumped in, for she felt she'd have little opportunity to speak going forward. Your pardon, great lady, I am not in the habit of speaking to a stranger without proper introductions. I am Lady Stenibelle, 30th daughter, House of Belmont, South Tyrol. And you are? The woman stopped what she was doing and appeared rather perturbed. She rolled her glyph over her knuckles and tapped the smooth desktop with her fingernails, making a musical clack, clack, clack. Stenibelle felt herself barbecuing in the woman's gaze.
I am Grand Dame Hannah Ben Sherland, Professor Emeritus, University of D. EVOR, QRDUP, NV PhD, Grand Secutor, Hobanus Realis, and Knight of Baz. Is that sufficient?
Stenibelle was certainly impressed. This woman appeared to hold just about every possible merit, title, and tenure available to a scholar. Her sister Lyra was currently working on her E degree from the University of Arden, which had taken her 6 years of total commitment and still had 2 or 3 to go. To become an EVOR would take a minimum another 150. You must be really old then, she wanted to say. Hannah Ben Sherland resumed her work and spoke.
To answer your first question, which is no doubt pending, I spent the time and effort to free you from prison because I wish to employ you. I pay quite well, and I'm aware your familial moneys aren't what they once were. Your house is marking time, isn't it? Which will come first, I wonder, your extinction or bankruptcy?
Now wait a moment. At least I'm not the one married to a fat guy wearing rouge, rolled through her head. Before Stenibelle could open her mouth and rebut, Hannah Ben Sherland continued.
I wish you to perform a simple infiltration and information gathering session aboard a fleet vessel. Your skills as a Tyrolese sorceress shall come in quite handy for this particular assignment, and should those fail, your toothsome pulchritude shall fill in the gaps nicely. Do you understand? The vessel you shall be infiltrating is this one here.
She moved her glyph, and the holographic image of a Sprint-class fleet vessel appeared, slightly spinning, long, pencil-like, with a small set of shoulder-mounted wings placed well aft.
The George Parr Spirit-class vessel Miranda variant carried by Lord Duval of Wiltshire in his 6th seating. Captain Duval is a veteran of many campaigns and battles. He is a family man, a sexton at his local church, and he is also a member of the Nihilists of Punt.
Stenibelle was about to ask who the Nihilists of Punt were when Hannah Ben Sherland cut her off.
The Nihilists of Punt are, on the surface, a casual social club like anyone might find and care to participate in around the League. However, a simple query into their club yields a strikingly different picture. They are not of League origins, appear to be quite ancient, and boast members in the League. The Zaffins, Ming Morland, and possibly the odd planet codename Mare by the Zaffins. Their motto is Se nade mote crumde, which is old Vith for we shall bring about the end of the universe.
They are attempting to bring about the end of the universe?
That is their motto, yes. They believe in being often called the visual vernacular, the shadow tech goddess, a fanciful creature, powerful enough to destroy everything around her, until she is all that is left.
She moved her glyph, and an odd carved image appeared in one of the floating hollows. It was a carving of some sort of a robed person, probably female, wearing a bullet-shaped, featureless helmet. From the sides of the helmet grew a host of twisting tubes and tentacles.
This is a representation of the shadow tech goddess that the Nihilists often carry with them. Their goal is to perform certain rites that allow for the introduction of the shadow tech goddess into this and other realms of being, thereby destroying them.
For creation's sake, why? Stenibelle asked.
Unknown and immaterial, as they do not seem to be able to accomplish their goal. There are many destroyers, beings of immense power who are tasked with cleansing certain areas of the universe from time to time, and the Shadow Tech Goddess is just one of them.
She moved her glyph, and the image of the Shadow Tech Goddess vanished, replaced by what looked like a raging shaft of a tornado, undulating and terrible.
This is another destroyer, one that I've seen with my own eyes, a cleanser of whole worlds.
She set the glyph down, and the image vanished.
But enough about this. The Shadow Tech Goddess and her quaint lore does not interest me in the least. What does interest me are certain bits of information the Nihilists are gathering in their attempts to summon the deity. That is why you are here.
Professor Shurlamp paused, apparently expecting Stenibelle to interject with a question. She asked none, and the professor went on.
I have it on good authority that the Nihilists have stumbled upon the stellar location of long-lost Camara.
Camara? Stenibelle knew the name. A place of lore, a long-forgotten homeworld, a place of magic and forgotten dreams. It was...
Yes,
the professor said, studying Stenibelle's face.
You know the name and the prospect interests you. Irresistible, isn't it? Camara, a place of wonder and riches that our ancestors abandoned with the elders 200,000 years ago during the eponymous CX time epoch. Camara, like our former homeworlds, Earth, Lemuria, Emeria, and Ing, is lost to the ages. We followed the elders, and as they moved on, we moved on too. And Camara was forgotten. Too much time has passed, and its stellar positioning is long since forgotten. Its light in the sky is unknown. This is an unforgivable offense, to forget knowledge that was once plain simply due to the passing of time. Of course, time is the great oblivion, as the sisters say. All shall be forgotten in time.
Why not ask your husband? He was probably there, she mused, proud of her unspoken wit. This professor couldn't possibly be serious.
There have been many scholarly efforts to rediscover Camara, Ing, and the rest. My peer, Professor Merrileman of Schuster, recently gave a symposium regarding his beliefs as to the location of Camara, and unfortunately, I had to discredit his claims and humiliate him publicly. Even that idiot Professor Compressor from Arden has chimed in on the subject.
Stenibelle stirred. What does the location of Camara have to do with the Shadow Tech Goddess? More wry wit bubbled up. Shall I take both she and your husband out for a walk?
Apparently, the Nihilists believe that certain arcane objects reside on Camara that shall assist them in summoning the Shadow Tech Goddess. My sources tell me that there is a great deal of credibility regarding their research.
And so, what do you want with me? Hannah Ben Sherland momentarily lost her cool, white-powdered demeanor. Her large brown eyes grew wide, and she coiled and twisted behind her desk like a great black snake covered in flour.
You are going to board the fleet ship. You are going to observe, integrate yourself, and listen. That done, you are going to get me the information I seek. You are going to get me the stellar positioning of Camara.
But I...
Such knowledge shall set the League on its collective ear. Whomever rediscovers Camara shall be celebrated forevermore as a pioneer and a visionary. Make no mistake, it shall be the name of Hannah Ben Sherland, Professor Emeritus, University of D alone, whose name is remembered as the rediscoverer of Camara. It shall be me who gives the lectures. It shall be me who breaks the bottle on the newly christened fleet ship, dispatched to quest to Camara for the first time in 200,000 years, and you, Lady Stenibelle, the worthless 13th daughter of a dying, impoverished, disgraced household, you are going to fetch me this information. I do not care what needs done. I don't care what bed you have to sleep in, what earlobes you have to bite, what poisons you have to administer, what murders you have to perform, what backs must be stabbed, or what graves you must lie in. I shall have this knowledge, and you are going to get it for me.
She placed her long, somewhat bony fingers on her desktop and moved her nails along the surface.
Am I clear?
It was like an icy wave had launched itself from across the room and hit Stenibelle full in the face. All of her wit and puns regarding the professor's husband dried up and wilted, replaced with shock and a touch of fear. It was like being stuck in a room with her old schoolmaster, whom she was terrified of. And if I...
refuse? I wouldn't if I were you. Please consider that I have extensive information on not only you, but all of your 29 sisters and your father and your dead mother, too. You must acknowledge by now that I am rather meticulous in my methods. I'll have your sisters defrocked from whatever social circles they inhabit. I'll have your father off his fleet chair and inhabiting a prison cell at Hagthorpe as you did. And I'll have your mother dug up and set into the stocks in Tyrol, where ruffians may throw rotting fruits at her equally rotting skeleton. And by the by, if it's any interest to you, I could have you right back in Hagthorpe prison alongside your father, should I choose to do so. But I think you would rather like that, wouldn't you? Yes. To sit unobserved in a comfortable, if Spartan cell, where your disgrace can be hidden and forgotten right along your tiny little carcass. Instead, I think I would go after what was left of your house. I'd call in markers and demand margin calls. I'd bankrupt you and allow your creditors to dissect the worthless remains of your holdings while you watch the entire ordeal from a cricket shack or whatever seating lodgings you can manage to afford. So, with that in mind, if you wish to be the stake that is hammered into your house's tortured heart at last, then by all means refuse.
The professor held Stenibelle locked in a brown-eyed stare for a few moments, then released her and began calmly typing again, her wave of fury past.
Of course, you also may accept and be the veritable dove that swoops in and saves your house instead. From convicted felon and public outcast to the grand matriarch of a new house of Belmont, South Tyrol, given a fresh lease and awash with new cash. That has a lovely ring, doesn't it?
Stenibelle struggled to recover and say something bold and courageous. Could it be true? She had no doubt this woman could do exactly what she said. To save her house and refresh its depleted coffers. She sat up and cleared her throat. Her heart beat with fearful expectation. Was the preservation of her house? She tried to offer a word in response, something grand and commanding, something masking her interest and excitement and conveying the illusion of indifference and skepticism as a good business person should, not tipping her hand too soon. All she could manage, though, was, "How?"
I have information of a previously unknown cousin of your house and of your mother's house of Tyrol. He is closely related enough that, should you or any of your sisters be wed to him, then all the league rules of heraldry shall be satisfied, and your house shall have its male heir at last. Your house and all its holdings shall remain whole and survive this generation and many more to come."
Stenibelle sat there and contemplated it. A male heir at last? The house of Belmont, South Tyrol, not lost, but forged anew, and it was the disgraced youngest daughter Stenibelle who brought its salvation to pass. Could it be true? The professor seemingly read her thoughts and knew the matter was settled.
"Yes, you shan't be disappointed. Now, let's to the matter at hand, shall we? I feel in reviewing your actions during the loss of your chair aboard the Seeker, you demonstrated poor leadership skills, appalling seamanship, lack of initiative, and a decided lack of imagination. You allowed the fleet's woman to up and board you without so much as a by your leave."
What was I to do? I had no power, no oxygen, and an untrained crew.
There were a number of things you could have done. You simply didn't do them. And then that fleet woman from Zinnan had you crawling up on the ground.
Stenibelle fought to offer an excuse. I was under orders. And she also offered, she was bigger than me.
Had she stood between me and something I wanted, she would not be breathing right now, I assure you. You lack ferocity, tenacity, ingenuity, and you failed to do what needed to be done. Accordingly, to address these shortcomings, I have left you some necessary tools in your room. I advise you to use them. Now, I am going to bathe you in a sterile cone, and you shall not forget what is told here."
Stenibelle had many questions. What is a sterile cone? Is it going to hurt? Should I prepare myself? Wait a moment. The professor pressed a button and Stenibelle was washed in a potent pinkish light that came down from above. The light from the sterile cone penetrated deep into her brain, opening it up and holding her in rapt attention. It felt like the top of her head had been lopped off and her brain scooped out, leaving a stringy, dry socket. The professor spoke in her slow, deliberate manner.
"Your instructions are as follows. You are to board the fleet sprint ship George Parr by whatever means required, and apply any necessary pressure to Captain Duval for him to divulge you the location of Kamara. You have 4 days to prepare, as he shall be set to dock at Hoffman Plate, berthing 77, Planet Fall by week's end. Additional persons of interest to be aware of: Lieutenant Rem Deckard, officially of Carina, but secretly from Modron. She is Captain Duval's first officer, a woman of Famora, an occasional lover. Rodrigo of Bergen, a Zathan warlord and nihilist of Punt, heading up the most recent effort to summon the Shadow Tech goddess. Melazar of Caroline, 25th daughter of the Zathan House of Caroline, a Zathantropist and a constant companion of Rodrigo of Bergen.
Shurlamp turned the sterile cone down and Stenibelle was free. The information just given to her sorted itself out deep in her thoughts and rooted itself. Lights danced in front of her eyes. Professor Shurlamp returned to her work, the carnival of hollows floating about her head. The door to the room opened, and the footman came and escorted Stenibelle away.
"Oh, and Lady Stenibelle, one more thing. If you don't come up with the information I seek, then don't come up at all."
And with that, we conclude Chapter 2, Hannah Ben Sherlamp. So obviously, throughout the course of this, as Stenibelle completed her journey from the transport to Professor Shurlamp's manor, she's grappling with all kinds of bad thoughts. Just review your own life in moments when you've been unsure of yourself or you've been humiliated, and those thoughts sting and they come back and they humiliate you afresh, and you sit there and go, I should have said this, or I should have zigged when I zagged, and you just grapple with these pesky thoughts that won't go away. Well, Stenibelle's having that problem. As I mentioned last week, Stenibelle is not a perfect character, which so many out there, especially on Twitter, demand of a female character. Well, she's got to be perfect. She's got to be good at everything. She's got to be invincible. She's got to be flawless. She's got to be cold and emotionally unavailable, and she's got to hate men. Well, that's not who this person is. She's not invincible. She's not flawless. She's dealing with lots of demons as this story begins. She has a profound lack of self-confidence. Professor Shurlamp summed up her flaws nicely. You lack a tenacity, ingenuity, ferociousness, and the will to do what needs to be done, whatever that might happen to be. Very terse assessment, but that's just the professor. And she says she has some trinkets waiting for her back in her room to address that problem. We'll find out what those trinkets are next week. I want to thank my good friend, the Queen of the League of Elder, Carol Phillips, for her rousing reading of Hannah Ben Sherlamp's lines. That was lots of fun. We'll be seeing more of Carol as this book goes on, as there's quite a bit more of Hannah Ben to come. Next week, we continue the adventure with Chapter 3, Bolabungs and Vunculas. So Stenibelle has been given her mission. Go to Hoffman Plate, Planet Fall, infiltrate the fleet sprint ship George Parr, and get Captain Duval to divulge the location of camera. And that comes up a lot in these Shadowtech Goddess books, finding out, especially with Hannah Ben Sherlamp, finding out the location of long-lost homeworlds. Scholarly accolades mean a lot to her, and she wants to be the one who gets all the credit. In the Shadowtech Goddess book, Ing she was looking for, and that tends to motivate her throughout these books. But in this one, it's Camera, and that was a planet the League inhabited 200,000 years prior. That's where the League was given the gifts of youth, where they don't get old, and health, where all the disease and infirmity was taken from them. So next week we will continue Bolabungs and Vunculas. The story is rolling along nicely. Thanks again to Carol Phillips, and until then, this is Ren Presents. I'm your host, Ren. Peace out.